Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is Sunday morning, April 22nd, 2018, TowerGate, day 407. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you, and really appreciate the fact that you take the time to put things in the comment sections, links and things like that. Wonderful comments. Really appreciate it. Thank you for tuning into it. As we see more and more of what's coming out in these little interviews that Comey is doing, more leaks about what's in his book. We get the Comey memos, and it is becoming obvious to, I think, members of the Freedom Caucus. We've heard from Jordan, Meadows, Gates, Nunes, people in the House Intelligence Committee specifically. It's looking like that we're getting a lot closer to understanding the relationship that was going on between the FBI and the intelligence community. We're starting to see now the evidence, and James Comey is the one giving us the evidence of exactly how, in that period of a couple of days, the dossier was able to find its way onto CNN, and then the next day to be released by BuzzFeed, and then the very next day it becomes the beginning of the Russia narrative. We are now able to look at these dates and events, which we've had for months and months, but Comey's memos and what he's saying in his interviews, like the one he did with Stephanopoulos, we're starting to get, he's really helping us connect the dots and incriminate himself and this sort of triad that we had between Clapper, Brennan, and Comey himself. So there's a couple things that have happened that are making it quite evident to anyone who's paying attention, but especially, like I said, Nunes and Jordan and Meadows, they're all talking about this. Judge Jeanine Pirro did a opening monologue, and she also is connecting the exact same dots that these guys are connecting, the same dots that I'm connecting. I see the exact same thing. I know exactly what Judge Pirro is talking about. I know exactly what Meadows and Gates and those guys are talking about, because so much of this stuff is come to us from The Last Refuge over at Conservative Treehouse, and it's been picked up by a lot of other people, and I follow it pretty closely. So let's go through a couple of the things, and so for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we're going to go ahead and cover a couple of these key events and factors that we've had, and then we're going to take the things that Comey has been saying and then connect these dots. And I think you'll see where it's becoming obvious, the picture is becoming much clearer about this sort of triad between Comey, Clapper, Brennan, and how the intelligence community worked with the FBI to really create the Russia narrative. And this was a carefully planned, it was a carefully executed plan. And it would appear that the plan probably originated with Mr. Potato Head, John Brennan, head of the CIA, and he was working with Clapper. And I think we're going to find that both of these guys were involved in some major leaking. And I think Comey is leading us right down. It's almost like Comey, I don't know if he realizes it or not, but it's almost like he's, throwing down the breadcrumbs, and you just have to follow them, and they take you right to where you want to go. It's almost like he's in a sick sort of way, like some sort of psychotic serial killer or something. He wants to be discovered, but he wants you to have to figure it out. He's playing with our head. Maybe he knows he's going down, but in the process he wants to play with our head or something. So anyway, let's go through this, and I think that you'll see what we're talking about, okay? Okay, some facts and some events. In the recent interview that Comey did with George Stephanopoulos, Comey said that CNN had the dossier story and they were looking for a hook so that they could release it. He says it's why he told Trump. That's what he told George Stephanopoulos. He said, I told Trump And the reason that I told Trump, because Stephanopoulos asked him, why did you tell Trump about this? He says, because we told Trump, we advised him because he needed to know, because the Russians might have this video evidence or evidence of him being peed on by Russian hookers in a Moscow hotel room. And that's all he told him, was the salacious parts of it. And he told Trump that the reason that, and told Stephanopoulos the reason he had to tell Trump was because CNN had the story and they were just waiting and looking for that hook that would hook them, give them a hook to the story so that they could then come out with it, because they were dying to come out with it, right along with a lot of other media organizations who we know have been given various forms of the dossier. It was in memos then. So here's Comey telling Stephanopoulos a couple things that are very critically important. And that's the only thing that he told Trump about, was the salacious and unverified parts of the dossier. And he didn't even call it the dossier or Christopher Steele dossier. Certainly didn't tell him it was paid for by Clinton. All he told him was that the Russians had this story, and he gave Trump details about being peed on by Russian prostitutes. And he said that the Russians might have a video, and that CNN had the story, and they were just looking for a hook. And it's because of that that this could come out, and they didn't want Trump to be blindsided. Comey says this is why he told him. But now, as you look at this thing from a different perspective, from the perspective that this was a setup, part of the greater frame-up, like many setups they put together, like the Trump Tower meeting and other things, you can see that what Comey's actually saying in a sort of psychotic, crazy way, he's essentially telling us that what CNN needed was the hook, and the fact that he briefed Trump on this was the hook. It became the hook. And when you listen to the way that James Comey words it, he's telling Stephanopoulos, yeah, they needed a hook. What would be the hook? Well, him briefing Trump on this would be the hook. He's essentially saying it, but he's not saying it. You see what I mean? But it's kind of weird. But once you put more and more facts together, you end up in the place where we'll end up here in a few moments. So, the next question you have to ask yourself is, where did CNN get the story? Now, we know that throughout the summer, they had been getting, probably through Confusion GPS, Christopher Steele, other sources, had been getting, bits and pieces, had been getting parts of this memo, the various memos that came out that eventually became the 35-page dossier. So where did CNN get it? Well, it's appearing now to a lot of people, based on the evidence, things James Comey's saying, when you look at times and dates and see the whole thing where it ended up and then go in reverse, it's pretty easy to end up right there at the door of James Clapper. James Clapper is looking more and more like he was the person who likely gave it to CNN. And you're starting to see Nunes and Gates and these other guys, you're starting to see them talking about Clapper, wondering if it was Clapper that gave it to CNN, because that's a very important question you have to answer, and it's one that I think they will get the answer to. I believe James Clapper will be questioned by the IG or Mr. Huber, and he will be asked, were you the one that leaked that information about the dossier to CNN? It was either him or Brennan, and we're going to find out why in just a moment. There's another interesting thing that we're learning as well, and that is that the CNN reporter who covered the Department of Justice for CNN was the daughter of Valerie Jarrett. Laura Jarrett, the daughter of Valerie Jarrett, was hired in the fall of 2016 to cover the Department of Justice. So here we have, in the fall of 2016, during the campaign, the daughter of Valerie Jarrett being planted at CNN. right about the same time that CNN is getting the story. And what did she cover for CNN? The Department of Justice. So, what really happened? Well, on the meeting of January 6th at Trump Tower, that was a setup to create the media narrative. Comey basically carried out the objective, and Clapper then leaked the salacious details to CNN about the meeting, about the fact that Trump had been briefed about this salacious story and that the Russians may have blackmail material or something like that. And keep in mind, as soon as Clapper left, he immediately went to work for CNN as an analyst. So the hook was that the president was briefed at Trump Tower. That was the hook, that he was briefed on the material, and it was likely Mr. Brennan, Mr. Potato Head, and the unwitting Clapper, James Clapper, who cooked up the plan. They had Comey execute the plan. That was his role in the scheme, was to do the briefing, but to only tell Trump what they needed to tell him about the dossier, the salacious parts of it, and gave him very limited information other than that. Didn't tell him who paid for it, didn't tell him anything else about it other than the Russians had this salacious information. They may have a videotape, they may try to use blackmail or something like that, and that, of course, Comey said that CNN has the story. So you can see that this would serve one particular interest, and that interest would be the meeting itself being the hook for CNN to run the story. Just like the Trump Tower setup, didn't matter what they talked about. All that mattered, the hook was just having the meeting. Didn't matter what happened in the meeting. The fact that the meeting happened was the hook. This is how these setups were done all throughout the larger frame-up operation that was going on, which involved obviously the FBI and the intel community with the Obama administration, the State Department, private contractors, and various other sources. Because once CNN reported on the meeting, BuzzFeed released the entire 35-page dossier. I think it was within, someone says, 10 minutes after the CNN story broke. 10 minutes later, BuzzFeed published the dossier. That also was probably planned. How do we know this was a plot by Mr. Clapper, by Mr. Potato Head, and Mr. Comey? How do we know? When you connect the dots and look at all the things that we know happened and the dates that they happened, then we have one final bit of evidence which shows us that it was clearly information that was planted at CNN, that was leaked to CNN, and it could only have been to individuals like Clapper and Brennan, who could have fed them this type of intel. And here's why we know. It's because CNN reported that Comey briefed Trump on a 2-page synopsis that made allegations that there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the government of Russia. And that is according to national security officials. Now, the question is, what two national security officials would have this type of high-level intelligence? And who would feel comfortable with leaking it to the media, knowing good and well that if it was some mid-level guy and he had this information and he leaked it, the seniors would be finding him or finding who did it very quickly, and there would be severe consequences if they would even have this type of intel. So CNN basically runs the story, and in their story, yes, they mention the salacious details, but they also mention something else. They mention that Trump was also briefed about a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries from the Russian government. But what have we learned from Comey in the last couple of weeks, last 2 weeks or so, since he came out and started talking, doing interviews, and as we're getting excerpts from his book? What have we learned? Well, we have learned, and this is where they are busted. We have learned that Comey told Stephanopoulos that he only briefed Trump on the PP-Gate story and that Russia may have tapes. Comey stated that he never mentioned anything about Trump team members having contact with Russians. CNN was reporting what Clapper and Brennan thought Comey said or what he was supposed to say. Maybe he forgot. And they got the nuanced details incorrect. So what's happening here? CNN comes out and they say, yeah, Trump was briefed on this thing about the Russian government has some salacious dirt on him, and they may have video that could blackmail him, and also Trump people in his campaign were meeting covertly with Russians, blah, 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 blah. But Comey comes out and tells Stephanopoulos, and he states also, as we can see from excerpts in his book, doesn't say anything about his conversation with Trump, telling Trump that members of his team were communicating with Russians in any way, shape, or form. Never brings any of that up. But CNN reports that he did. So if he didn't, then how would CNN have this information? They're telling us about information that they shouldn't have, because it didn't happen. Comey didn't brief Trump on this idea that he had people in his campaign meeting with Russians. He only told him about the salacious stuff. But CNN is telling us about that, which means that they had to get that from somewhere. And the only two people who could have given him that likely had to be either Brennan or Clapper. That's why everyone is now dialing down on this particular fact, because what this almost clearly shows is that when you look at the dates, when you look at the dates, it all falls into place. Now, here's another point. Who was Clapper and Brennan's man at CNN? Who was it that they were probably feeding? Well, probably none other than Jake Clapper. And it was Clapper's interview with Jake Clapper that started the Trump-Russia collusion narrative. That occurred on January the 11th, 2017, the very day after Clapper leaked the details of the Trump-Comey meeting to CNN. So he leaks this information to CNN the day after Comey meets with Trump at Trump Tower and tells him about the dossier. The very next day, Clapper leaks to CNN that the meeting happened, and then the very next day after that, Clapper goes on CNN with Jake Tapper and begins the Trump-Russia narrative. Mr. Potato Head, Clapper, and Comey were all working, scheming together to start the Trump-Russia narrative, and CNN's Jake Clapper used like a tool to start the narrative, which of course he was happy to do. And who was it who first pointed out this strange series of events that took place in these 3 days? None other than Bob Woodward of Watergate fame. This is where we are now. So, you can expect that there's going to be focus on this because the IG is likely going to stumble onto this. He certainly will know about the dates, those 3 important dates. The January 9th meeting where Comey goes and tells Trump about the salacious dossier but doesn't tell him anything else. Then the next day, CNN leaks the, or doesn't leak, I mean CNN broadcast the story that the meeting occurred between Trump and Comey, and they basically give us information that Comey did not give Trump. They have information that they shouldn't have had. But they had that information because they got it from Clapper, who was working with Brennan and Comey. Then the very next day, Clapper goes on CNN and begins the Russia narrative. So, we can now see this sort of three-way operation that was going on. It now explains where CNN got the story, and those 3 days, January 9th, 10th, and 11th, those 3 days in a row, the things that happened, the things that Comey is now saying in his interview with Stephanopoulos, things that are in his book, are clearly beginning to show that there was a collaborated effort, an organized plan, a scheme with Comey, Brennan, Mr. Potato Head, and Clapper, that there was an organized criminal scheme, a criminal conspiracy, and that's how we can see that the Trump-Russia narrative was born. Nunes, Jordan, Gates, Meadows, Mr. Geneva, Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, you get on the list. A lot of people now are connecting these dots. It's becoming very clear what happened in those 3 days. And James Comey is literally like the Pied Piper. He's literally like the guy dropping the breadcrumbs on the gingerbread trail so that we can follow them. It's almost like he's leading us directly to the truth. I don't know if he's aware of this, if it's subconscious, or if he's some kind of psycho playing us, or playing a game or something. I really don't know, but he's helping us connect the dots here. And now we're looking at these 3 dates and the events that happened, and the way that CNN reported the story compared to what James Comey is saying. It's making it pretty obvious what happened here. James Comey is going to be the next person indicted right after McCabe. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, McCabe hasn't been indicted, he might not be. It's possible he might not be. Possible the U.S. attorney could look at this and go, yeah, well, I have these referrals from the Congress, I have the referrals from the IG, but I don't think I'm going to prosecute, even though the FBI and the DOJ have already fired him, and this and that and the other thing. We don't think that this is a work-related matter, and we're not going to press charges. It's possible the U.S. attorney could do that. But I think there would be severe blowback because they've already set the precedent. They prosecuted Michael Flynn for making false statements. The IG report clearly shows that McCabe made false statements on 4 occasions at least, 2 times under oath, and they'll find much more. But the narrative is becoming clearer and clearer every day, and it implicates not just McCabe, but Comey. We'll get to Lynch. We'll get to Yates. But now Clapper and Brennan are now starting to come into the picture. You see how this is working? We're moving farther, closer and closer, getting deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And every time we learn a certain amount, it leads us to the next point. So we keep, getting the truth. It's just slowly unraveling, like peeling back layers of an onion. So the layer of onion this week peeled back revealed this, and it takes us into the orbit of Clapper and Brennan. Now, there's another question that's being asked by Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton. Did Comey collude with Mueller? Was this part of an even larger setup plan? Was Mueller working with Comey as well, and possibly Rodenstein to do a setup operation by releasing Comey released those memos to his friend at Columbia University saying, I want you to give that to the New York Times so that we can get a special prosecutor. And it's, of course, turns out to be Mueller. So now Judicial Watch is suing, doing a FOIA request to get all communications between Comey and Mueller after the appointment of Mueller. From that point forward, up to the current time, we'll see if he gets them. Like I said, Comey will be the next one indicted. McCabe, I believe, will be indicted. I think there'll be too much public pressure if they try to let him off the hook. And there's so many more things that we're going to learn that there's no question he will be indicted. Multiple indictments on multiple counts. So will Comey. We also have this very interesting statement by Sessions where he comes out and says, you know, if Rodenstein is fired, I will have to resign. So Sessions coming out and saying if Rodenstein's fired, he'll have to resign. Well, I'm thinking that once the IG report comes out and shows that Rodenstein was a person who signed off on the FISA warrant, may have been involved in other things, part of the cover-ups and things and such, that he will have to actually resign. It won't have to be a matter of Rodenstein being fired. He will have to resign because he will then become a target of the investigation. He can't be a target of the investigation as Deputy Attorney General running the Mueller probe when, in fact, you know, he can't be running the Mueller probe when he's the target of an investigation. He will be too compromised, and he's already compromised. I don't think it's the issue of him being fired. I think he will have to step down, be forced out. And if Sessions goes, the hell with him. Replace him. It's not like he's been doing a bang-up job as far as I can tell. I don't know, maybe he'll prove us wrong, but at this point, wouldn't break my heart. So, the next thing we want to look at is the situation that's now setting up with Comey, the Comey versus McCabe, which is setting up, and then we have the McCabe versus Lynch. We have the DOJ, and we also have the Comey versus Lynch himself. So both McCabe and Comey have now been drawn into conflict with one another. Both McCabe and Comey have been drawn into conflict with Loretta Lynch and the Department of Justice. So let's take a closer look at that. Now imagine, if you will, this main point of disagreement between Comey and McCabe is whether or not McCabe did make Comey aware of these leaks he was doing to the Wall Street Journal, the leaked story. Comey contends he was not told. McCabe and his lawyer contend that Comey did know and that McCabe did inform Comey about this. Now what this means is that once McCabe is indicted, and I believe he will be indicted, once the grand jury is convened or the hearings begin, Comey is likely going to be the witness. Not maybe the star witness, but one of the main witnesses on this particular point. He will be the key witness. And so you're going to have McCabe and Comey coming to completely at odds with one another. One of them is lying. One of them is lying. And so the question is, will we find out who is lying? Will McCabe be able to produce the evidence, or anyone else produce the evidence proving that? Or will Comey be found out that he is lying, and in fact he did know and was briefed about this leak to the Wall Street Journal? I find it difficult to believe that he didn't know. I find it difficult to believe. Whether or not that can be proven, I don't know. And that could be the game that Comey is playing, that, yeah, I knew, but they can't prove it. They can't prove it. That may be the game he is playing. This is all going to play out in court. It's going to be quite a sight to see Comey up there and McCabe locked up and pointing the finger at each other and accusing each other of lying. It's also going to be interesting when McCabe, who is also pointing out, and we know from one of his emails, that he was pressured by the Department of Justice to back down or back off from the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. This puts McCabe at odds with not just Comey, but the Department of Justice. That would be either Yates or Lynch or both. Then we have Comey, who of course got this issue with McCabe over whether or not he knew or was told about the leak to the Wall Street Journal. But we also have Comey at odds with Lynch himself. So both McCabe and Comey are at odds with each other. They're at odds with Lynch and the Department of Justice over other things. This is all going to be sorted out. This is all going to be sorted out. We also have McCabe coming out, his lawyer making a statement that McCabe was upset and disappointed by Comey's comments. And of course we have the email of an angry McCabe complaining that the DOJ officials, Department of Justice officials, were pressuring him to back down or back off on the Clinton Foundation investigation. Certainly they want him to back down on the commenting on it, leaking stories about it, or doing anything like that. So here we have all these internal conflicts between Lynch, Comey, and McCabe, and probably Yates is in the mix, and others. And of course, Obama had to know about every bit of this, and we know that from the loose Lisa Page text, where she said that they were talking about having the meeting with Obama, and she said he wants to know everything about the investigation. And this would have been the investigation they were talking about, the Trump-Russia investigation, because the email investigation was now long in the rearview mirror and wasn't on the front burner anymore. It was all Trump-Russia now when this conversation took place. So here we can see what's setting up. But there's something else that could happen here. Right now, McCabe is on total defense, and he's believing and hoping that he will not be charged by the U.S. attorney. But I believe he will be, if not for this, then for something else, because he's also involved in the insurance policy, that little meeting in Andy's office about the insurance policy that Strzok and Page talked about. And keep in mind, Strzok and Page are now witnesses for the prosecution, for the IG, for Mr. Huber. They probably have already had to explain what that insurance policy was that they discussed in Andy's office. McCabe was also involved in sitting on the Wiener emails for a month before they came out. He was involved in the email investigation. He was involved in the process of looking at those 302s after the Michael Flynn interview. And it's believed that he possibly altered, changed, or destroyed 302s. So there's a lot of things out there for McCabe. This is just the tip of the iceberg for McCabe. So I do believe he will be indicted. And then the next question becomes, will McCabe be the scapegoat? Because if they play their cards right, they could end this thing at McCabe. And they could probably shield all the rest. They could all turn on him and use him as the scapegoat. And they could all basically say anything he's saying against them basically is a lie. They could destroy McCabe, take him out, use him as a scapegoat, and save their necks. Quite honestly, I believe there's too much other information to do that, but it's probably the strategy that they'll employ. Now, McCabe, once he is indicted, and he has not yet been indicted, but once he is indicted, and then other indictments come down for other things, he may begin to see the seriousness of his situation, and a lot of these crimes we're talking about carry minimum 5-year prison sentences, and he could be looking at back-to-back 5-year prison sentences and many, many fines. So he could find himself feeling the pressure. And remember what he said, if they scapegoat me, I'll burn the whole effing thing down. What's he talking about? He's talking about taking a lot of people down with him if they try to scapegoat him. He must have some evidence. I'm sure he does. I'm sure he knows a lot of things. McCabe knows all about the insurance policy. He knows about fixing the email investigation. He knows everything, pretty much everything. He is in a prime position as a guy who's getting squeezed real hard. And the exact same thing that was done, attempted to be done to Manafort and others to squeeze them to get them to squeal on Trump, the same thing is going to be done to McCabe. The only difference is Manafort and Gates and these other people had nothing on Trump. McCabe has got the whole bag. He's got the whole bag on Comey, Yates, Lynch, probably Obama, and the whole 9 yards. And you got Page and Strzok and Orr and Priestep probably cooperating, which will corroborate the truth when McCabe decides to tell it. And he may decide to tell it to save his neck and give up Comey, Lynch, and Rice. That will take you into the White House, and that's when this thing blows up. It's right after McCabe is indicted. Watch very carefully what he does in the days after his indictment. Does he take the fall, be the scapegoat, or does he blow this thing up and take the effing thing down? We'll watch and see. Thanks for tuning in. Guys, have a good day. Bye.